Now live and recording now. So very good. It's nicer looking day out there this morning anyway.
It's gorgeous, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it always is in the northwest, isn't that right, Kirsty?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sure, it's dull as dishwater up here.
It never rains over here at all, actually.
No, it's, you're the Bahamas of Ireland. I know that.
That's it, yeah.
Very worse climate.
Okay. Just give a minute just for everybody to join. There's still a few people joining here. Just give it another second. Okay, look, you're all very welcome to this this morning's webinar, Non-Executive Directors Helping to Realise Your Ambition. My name is Paul Clancy and I'm CEO of the Londonderry Dairy Chamber and a EURES advisor for this region. And we are delighted that so many of you could join us today. And I'm really looking forward to the event this morning. And just a bit of a reminder of what the event overview is, this webinar aims to take the mystery out of the appointment of non-executive directors to your board, and matched appropriately to your business, they can add real value by creating a strategic partnership, offering investment opportunities and free thinking. You have an opportunity to text questions through during the webinar via the text icon at the bottom of your screen. And look, we'll endeavour to get through those questions as we go through the webinar, and anything that we don't get through, we'll come back to you afterwards on it. But before I make a start, could I just ask you to put your microphones on mute, just to minimise the interference. And I would like to introduce this morning's panel to you. I'm delighted to say we've Paul McIlvenny, and Paul is CEO and founder at Learning Pool, and from humble beginnings in Derry in 2006, Paul and his team have grown Learning Pool to be a world leader in workplace learning, providing innovative solutions to some of the world's biggest brands and most important government bodies. And Learning Pool now employs more than 200 people across the UK and the US. Having partnered with an Irish equity fund in 2016, the business has trebled in size and has ambitions to replicate that in the next 4 years. So that's just an amazing achievement, Paul. And it's going to be really interesting to hear your story and how the NED has contributed to that growth. So we're looking forward to that. And then we have his partner, who's going to help us out as well. And to join up the dots, Dr. Brian Keating, CBE. And Brian is a managing partner of the CIP partnership. He's also the chair of Learning Pool, a visiting professor at the University of Ulster, a director of Catalyst, vice chair of Diversity Mark NI, an organisation that helps companies address diversity and inclusion issues, and a co-chair of the Northern Ireland Wise Hub, supporting girls and women choose and progress in STEM careers. So Brian, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Kirsty McManus is joining us as well this morning. Kirsty was appointed as National Director for the Institute of Directors in Northern Ireland in August 2017. Formerly Assistant Regional Director at the Northern Ireland Confederation of British Industry, CBI. Kirsty's appointment followed a successful career during which she held senior positions at the Ulster University, NI Chamber, and I hope I pronounced this properly, Vistage in California, or Vistage? Yeah,
Vistage.
Vistage, okay. And last but not least, Susan Nightingale. Susan is a senior manager in Northern Ireland at British Business Bank. She's a chartered accountant and experienced financial professional with an in-depth knowledge of the SME funding environment across both debt and equity markets. So I think you can see from our panel, we're trying to join up the dots here and the various things, but primarily focused around the non-executive directors and their input and support to help businesses grow, I guess. So look, maybe Paul, I could just kick off with you, if that's okay, with the first question. We just heard about your business, from a start now to 200 people, global presence. Could you describe your relationship that you've had with your non-execs and how that's helped your development over that period?
Sure, yeah. So I think, our story is fairly similar to a lot of businesses like ours, Paul, and we've sort of always relied on friends to help us out since we started the business back in 2006. But certainly the relationship that I have with my non-execs is certainly one of the most important relationships that I've got in the business, and has been really crucial, I think, to the success of Learning Pool over the years. And I think, the relationship between sort of management team and the non-exec, I kind of characterize it as having two distinct parts. On the one hand, there's the sort of formal part of the relationship where you sort of base that and anchor that around board meetings, review of the strategy, and the governance and the responsibilities that everyone has as the director. And on that respect, I suppose I've got a really good experience of that, because the independent non-execs, I've got two, Brian, who's on the call, and Donald Clark, who's a UK based executive that non-exec that's been on our board for ages, and those two people play off each other very well. They've got very different skill sets, very different approaches, but commonality around the stuff that matters in terms of the governance of the business and the commercial go forward plan. So that formal relationship tends to hang off, regular board meetings, regular management updates, and all those sort of formal reviews of progress that you do. And then the next sort of tier to it, I guess, is the informal piece. So I think one of the things for me is that while I've got an amazing management team around Learning Pool, and we work very closely together, I think it's fair to say that there are days when you need to be able to lift the phone, and I've had lots of the conversations that I've had with Donald and Brian over the years have started with me in a fair degree of exasperation, saying you'll never hear what's happened now, and I think the role of the non-exec there is not necessarily to calm you down and sort of pat you on the head, but it is to provide the benefit of the experience that they have outside of their business, plus that independent view. Sometimes when you're in the muck and the bullets, it can be very difficult to see that actually it's not all that bad, and yeah, this is a problem, or sometimes that this is a big opportunity, and the balance that you get, I think, from the non-execs there is about saying, what, don't get carried away on the good stuff, and don't get too downhearted on the bad, and let's work through it. And non-execs by their definition, I've got some examples, some experience of very, very positive relationship with non-execs, but I think generally speaking, anyone who wants to be or puts themselves forward as a non-exec is going to have that experience and that depth of understanding of the challenges that you're facing that can help a management team. I feel like I've been doing this job for a long time, Paul, but this is the first time I've been a chief exec of anything, and so it's been a hell of a learning journey for me, and having non-execs as a result of that has been really, really important.
So Paul, some of the things you mentioned about the sounding boards as well, it's such an important thing that you have somebody you can call, because I suppose being at the top of the leadership ladder, if you like to call that, and I know you mentioned about your team around you and you empower them to do, to keep your strategic direction correctly, but at the same time, it can be a lonely position, I'm sure, at times, and it's nice to be able to pick up that phone and say, look, can I run something by you here before I bring it to the rest of the team? And it's using that experience, I guess, and tapping into your own experience as well, that you're a stronger team at the end of the day, I guess.
Yeah, that's it. And I've got a pretty well functioning management team, but every now and again there's a lot of passion around the room, and not everyone agrees with everyone all the time. So you can't have a conversation about the management team whenever that's where the problem is. And so that external sounding board is great in that respect.
Yeah, look, I'm going to take this first question, Paul, just before I move on to Brian there. It's what prompted Paul to recruit a non-exec, and did he have any concerns at the time?
Yeah, so as I say, we started off with probably imposing on Donald and Brian as if you like unofficial advisors for a long time, and I think that was, looking back, that was probably the right thing to do. I had copious cups of coffee with Brian in Belfast and Donald in London before we really got to what you might call a formal sort of board structure, and so I think it was very clear from those conversations that there was a tremendous value in having that external support, that there was there was a different dimension that we were going to get from having that, and then over time we made it into a formal structure. I suppose were there surprises, were there concerns? Yeah, I guess you set up a business because you want to be in charge, and the idea that you bring a non-exec in questions whether or not you're still in charge. Who's in charge of this business? But to be honest, that's not a legitimate concern, and I think it is a concern that people have, but it's wrong. Bringing a non-exec in is not about bringing someone in to run the business. That's your job as chief exec. And bringing in non-execs is about helping make that happen. So I think those concerns get allayed pretty quickly when you have those cups of coffee, and when you have conversations with the people who you want to bring in as board members, and pretty quickly you work out that there's got to be a good structure, a good cultural fit. This has got to make sense. Everyone's got to feel comfortable with it, and that's not about some of the most challenging. So the challenge that I get most is from my non-execs. They will, they hold me to account. They don't let me, they don't let me away with stuff that they know is wrong. But they don't. That's not to say that's an adversarial relationship. It's far from it. So I think if you bring in a non-exec, you have to be ready to be challenged. You have to say, look, keep an open mind on this. And sometimes sometimes I don't agree with what Brian tells me. But by the time I've got home and then that evening I've worked it out in my head, I'm like, yeah, that's really annoying because he's actually right. I'm going to have to figure that out.
Well, maybe, Paul, I can give you a break there for a second then, and we'll move swiftly on to Brian because there's another question came in actually, Brian, which I'd like to run by you. And maybe you can add some light. When do you know you're ready for an NED? And are there key milestones that are common from your experience of being involved with different companies?
That's an extremely good question, Paul. I think that the other Paul number one or number two, they call it Paul, did a very good summary of all of that in terms of how long he decided to do all of that. So that's a really difficult question, and the question that one is sometimes a penny drops. If you go to, I was I was a SEC for 40 years ago, and the first 10 years it was really a management meeting, not a board meeting. And even when I became a non-exec, I didn't quite grasp it all. The IOD and Kirsty IOD and I have a myriad of really good documents to explain all of that. But and they agree, I still use them today, use them when I'm starting with other companies and say, go through all of that. But the heart of that is you need to know that you need it. And the question is, this is exactly what happens in life. You talk to people in a cafe, you meet somebody else, you think, I must do that. So you hear it, but you don't absorb it. It's a really difficult one to realize what you're missing if you haven't gotten commas a good board, which is another definition. It's hard to do.
It's okay. Just nothing. What value do you think a non-exec can bring to a business or an organization?
I think Paul hit it in the head. What you're doing when you look at the IOD definition, it is about this independence, it is about the stewardship of the company, it is about shareholder values, all those good things, and you couldn't fault any of those definitions and say, I do all of that. I think the heart of it is what Paul was saying, it is the added value you bring through experience, through context, how you raise money, how you dealt with a particularly difficult director, etc., executive director. So those things come to the party. And that is the real value. And Paul hit in the head, most of that great value is outside of the formal board meeting. The formal board meeting is great because it is probably the first time, Paul hit on this one, it's the first time someone else says we're going to have a meeting every month. Because when I was a chair, I was a managing director, we said we'll meet on next Tuesday. Next Tuesday was a very important meeting, so we just bumped it. It was the following month and the month after that. So all of a sudden you have a set of people who say, well, where's the board papers, right? It's not that companies can't produce board papers and the quality, because they're meant to be tools for the executives, right? But always something comes in the way, another seminar, another sales meeting, whatever. So the heart of that is, all of a sudden, as Paul said, you could structure, and that alone is great. And with that comes hopefully good questions and good support, probing questions, not always easy questions. But it's the first time, not only the managing director, but the CEO, but the team ask themselves, they should be asking the same questions. But I noticed, like, once in the cold face, almost impossible to get away from that, to really ask the right questions what's in the back of your head, but you never ask because you're doing operational things. So, and I say, lifting the phone, when Paul lifts the phone to me, Paul is, and I've worked with many of the best CA I've ever worked for. So Paul rarely phones me, and when he does phone me, he usually 99%, I've always been kind, 90% he knows what the answer is, but it is just the fact of lifting the phone and talking it through. And by the time he's talked to me, and I've said about 4 things in maybe half an hour, they're just, yes, Paul, or that's quite good. So he knows what it is. So to me, that is the true value, but it doesn't always work like that. And I think maybe some of the people on this call who haven't formed boards hear the horror stories, and it may put them off in terms of delaying what should be a very important part of the structure of a company.
Okay, Brian, look, thanks. I'll come back to you again. I have another question for you that I'm holding back for the moment. Kirsty, could I come on to you? There's a question came in there, and actually it says, do your companies advertise an interview for the NED posts? I am a NED on the public board for the Justice Department, and I had to go through a rigorous selection process, and I'd be keen to get involved with local companies. And I do know that, if you like, the brainchild of this webinar today came on a webinar that Kirsty and Susan were on together. We were talking about matching NEDs to businesses that are looking for that support. And it was a kind of a mismatch or somewhere, mislinking, or you have a body of people there that are available, and it's really letting people be aware of the skills base you have. What's the process there, Kirsty, for somebody who'd be interested?
So as I said, we've lots of people who are interested in being a NED. The challenge is we don't have enough companies who are willing to take on NEDs. And my advice to anyone who's interested in taking on a NED, you need to do an interview process. You need to understand, what do you need from that NED? And I know Paul went through that process recently when they appointed a NED. So it should be like any type of recruitment, and it should have a thorough process. It can't be what has happened in the past, where it's been the hand of God, or you play golf with someone and you say, actually, you're my golf buddy, love you on the board, you're not going to challenge me too much, and really, is that going to move the business on? So I think what we would say is, you do need that rigorous process. What are you looking for in an NED? Whether it's particular expertise and maybe in a market, or it's maybe opening a book of contacts in a particular sector. So it's refining, looking at your entire board, where are the skills gaps, where are the opportunities there to almost balance out your board for the betterment of your business. So Brenda, just back to your point, if you are interested, I mean, we do have, as I said, a list of non-executive directors that we can match. But we would be encouraging businesses to advertise any NED opportunities and go through the interview process. And as Paul said, what happens quite a lot, Paul, is businesses are nervous about taking on a NED because they want to kind of see if there's good synergy there with individuals. So what we do see is a lot of businesses maybe will take them on as a strategic advisor for maybe 6 months. And it's a way of kind of testing the water on both sides and seeing what value that they can bring. That happens quite frequently, and then the relationship is formalized then with a non-executive director. So, but for us, and what we see at the moment, is the businesses that we believe will succeed through COVID and Brexit and all of those challenges are those businesses that have non-executive directors. They have that additional brain power, that additional capacity and experience, that wisdom and that cognitive diversity to get them through these crises. So it just means that the executive directors who are firefighting at the moment, dealing with COVID, and their head is down, they can't really see what's happening in the next few years and may miss opportunities, where your non-executive directors there have the time and probably have been through a crisis before and can provide that wisdom and experience. And a lot of it is that corporate therapy that Paul spoke about, just somebody that you can sound check ideas with. Because, if you're a chief executive, many times you can't have those conversations with your management team. Whereas with a non-executive team, you can say, look, here's what I'm thinking with X, Y, and Z. What do you think? And getting that honest, independent view. And it's about collectively working together for the success of the business, which is very different in the public sector. And as Brian said, we've probably seen, the public sector is a very different board composition than what would happen in the private sector. So we do need to acknowledge that. But what I'd like to see is more businesses formalising their board structure and obviously formalising the recruitment of boards going forward in the future.
Okay, Kirsty, thanks for that. And Susan, maybe I'll come on to you actually, because it kind of falls nicely. What Paul in his profile there that he gave us in advance was about the raising equity and alternative routes to finance, which maybe people didn't know about, and how having a board and having a non-direct exec can actually help you to put that business case together. Would you be able to just talk about what supports maybe are there for businesses who are considering to bringing in a non-executive director, and how, you know, from your background, what are some of the challenges that you're coming across? You're just on mute there, Susan.
There had to be one of us.
Yeah, no problem.
I suppose there are a couple of things just to touch on. You touched on the equity piece and the funding piece, so I'll look at that bit first. And you know, I think it's fair to say that the high street bank tends to be the first port of call for a lot of businesses when they're seeking finance to grow. And you know, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but the thing is that very often it's going to be the case that the business won't get the support they need, and that could be for a variety of reasons. It might be lack of security or a lack of track record, or just down to the fact that the proposal is just too risky for a bank. But I think, you know, the important thing is that that shouldn't be the end of the road. There are so many different forms of finance out there and so many different providers. And I think what tends to happen when you have that non-exec director involvement is that individual will most likely have been through the process of successfully scaling and exiting a business before, and they'll have a really good understanding not only of the role that external finance plays in accelerating a business growth, but more importantly, what the right type of finance is at a particular point in time during a growth journey. So, you know, often equity is overlooked in that equation, and I think non-executive directors are really critical to taking a more subjective look at that funding package and broadening it beyond just a high street bank, which can really, you know, accelerate the growth. I think, Paul, you referred to it at the beginning, you know, in terms of your own company and equity that's being taken on and how that has trebled the growth. It makes a huge difference.
And Paul, just like when you got to that point, I mean, was that a scary decision to make, or was it?
It's terrifying. Paul,
how long did it take to get to that point in your mindset, and what kind of said, right, you know, I got to go with this. We got to take this chance.
Yeah, well, I mean, so we bootstrapped Learning Pool for 10 years, and then sort of bypassed a few phases of external investment and just went straight to a private equity growth fund, which was quite unusual. But our experience there actually was, so, you know, I think for any company thinking about doing this, you know, if you're going to take in any type of sort of risk funding, private equity, venture capital, you know, those guys are going to put themselves on your board. And so our experience of that was, you know, we came to that process having Donald O'Brien as an established board, and our pitch, I guess, to our incoming investor was to say, well, I've got a board, so you can join that, which was, I think, a fundamental element of our success. You know, I think I dread to think really what that would have been like if we had come and said, well, now we'll create a board, because it was sort of, you know, external investment comes with its own reporting requirements and analysis of the numbers 25 different ways and stuff. and so for our experience, we said, well, look, I've got 2 independent non-execs and they're great. You can meet them, and if there's an issue, we can deal with that. But, you know, it was pretty quick conversation. You know, my incoming investor were very supportive of keeping Brian and Donald on the board and building on what we'd already achieved. And then, so for that period when we've had investors on board, you know, an investor coming in will become a director of your company and will have the same fiduciary duties that you do. Yeah. But they've also got the responsibility to their fund, right? So it's, you know, it doesn't necessarily create a lack of alignment, but it sort of can. And so from my perspective, I was very keen to say, well, look, I am keeping 2 independent non-execs on the board because they don't have any conflict. They are aligned around the business, and that's it. And because, you know, like, let's be honest, you know, I can be conflicted as well around what's right for the business, but what's also right for me personally and for my team, which might not always be the same thing. So having some non-execs sort of sat in the middle there, if you like, has been fantastic for us, and it's really, I think there's a curious thing. What happens whenever you take external investment in is that people try to change the business, and it ends up slowing it down, not speeding it up for a little while. And I think we avoided that trap, and it's been great. It's been great for us as well when we've done a number of acquisitions, and those acquisitions from an investor perspective, they just need to make sense as a spreadsheet. If the spreadsheet makes sense, it's grand. Whereas what Donald O'Brien will be constantly challenging about is about, does this make sense for the business? Does this make sense for the people? Are customers going to get a better deal here? Is this the right thing to do? And largely that's been more important, because sometimes the spreadsheet hasn't necessarily made that much sense, and that's why it's a risk. So the independence of the board on that has been really useful.
Brilliant. Maybe Brian, I could come on to you on that point there. You talked about the good times. You're a man that's glass is half full, I think. But could what about the good times and some of the more challenging times as a non-exec? Could you maybe outline some of those for us?
Well, the good times are easy. The good time, I don't have a love in here, but Paul is the best CEO I've worked with, and I've worked with very, very good ones. I think that the good times is when, like Paul was saying, is the alignment of the board, and all of that is a good alignment. And Paul will tell you, it's not about agreeing on everything. It's not about not having hard times with customers, perhaps, and the thing. But the key thing is that everyone, the board, the non-execs, the senior team, and the whole team are hitting common issues and tackling it together with trust, and that is the best of times. And just so happens Learning Pool is so customer centric. It's just unbelievable. The only company I've ever had that feeling, and it's indirectly because clearly you only see it on TV or on webinars, is Apple. That love for Apple, and customers have that for Learning because of people like Paul and Louise and the whole team. The bad times is when things don't happen, and what happens there is that quite often young companies, it's down to, Susan would know this as much as anyone, it's usually about money. There's no money, and people's bad traits come out, selfish traits come out. They blame everybody but themselves, and you get total distrust. And those are the ones I think that maybe some people on this call may hear these stories about what boards did to companies, which is absolute nonsense, but it is the consequences of people not doing what's supposed to do, or even worse than that, not honest enough to say, do you know something, we failed in China, our product's not working, and the worst thing boards hate, non-execs hate more than anything else, is surprises. Going into a board meeting and all of a sudden saying, somebody said, well, sacked who, or whatever it is, and that's where I think the bad news stories happen. And I've been on a few, and then Paul quite rightly says that those are the ones that teach you so much. And I try to explain to Paul what has happened in the past, because not every board is like the Learning Pool board for many reasons. And I've been on boards which are fractious, confrontational, and has ended up in great emotional stress for everyone, including non-execs.
Making sure it works for both parties, really, isn't it? At the end of the day, making sure
it is, and it is about
clear. Sorry. And when people come to you, or business come to you, do they have a clear strategy, or what's your approach to it? You say, look, tell me about your business here. Can you have your strategy document, or is it a chat, or what's the format?
Normally, all the years, most of the boards I sit on, apart from Learning Pool, have been part of the was my day job as an investor. So I end up going into companies that never had a board. And all the years, despite the fact the number of boards I've chaired, I've never ever sought a chair, never. And I've done it because there's no one else to do it. I've just done it, and I've learned the hard way. I've learned, IOD have been a godsend in terms of underpinning all the good things to do. And I've always, that's like the Bible, so I always go back to that, to whatever. But it's been very rarely have I gone to a company. Learning was entirely different because it had all of that, Andor had all of that. Maybe 4 or 5, but most of them don't have strategy. Most of them mix up strategy with plans. Most mixed up board meetings with management meetings, and that's okay. It's because you don't know what it is. You don't know what good structures look like, good for you. And the key thing that Paul said, I want to just emphasize, Paul, is that one size does not fit all. So one board that works in a certain way, if you just try to replicate it with a different company, with a different customer set, with a different financial background, just doesn't work. You just can't do, cookie cutters and say, oh, well, that's the way it all works. Oh, Paul or Siobhan's a great non-Zax, and let's parachute them in. So go back to what Kirsty, you got to have formal interviews. Okay. It's always two-way, because the non-Zax potential non-Zax must really look at and think, something, I really can't, I'm flattered you've asked me, I'm flattered to be here, but they have to be honest themselves, saying, I'm not going to add a lot of value because I don't know the industry, I'm not sure about the financial side of it, it's not great chemistry, and you got to say, I love it and I love to be part of this and whatever, but you got to say, because it's so frustrating if you're on a board and you're not adding value. It's just, for non-Zax, it is pretty awful.
Okay.
I mean, if I could just jump in there, Paul. I mean, I think Brian's been a bit overly complimentary about what Learning Pool was like when he had me form the board. At that point, the strategy was grow the business, don't lose money, and that was sort of it. And so I think the point there, maybe for people listening in, is that didn't necessarily cause a big issue, and it wasn't that Brian and Donald came in and said, well, we can't go a step further until we write down what the strategy is in the business plan for the next 10 years. As non-execs, they came in and said, well, okay, look, we need more structure. We need to move this from an operational sort of debating society into something that's focused on the strategy, and therefore let's start to write down the strategy. But it was an evolutionary thing. It wasn't about let's take 3 months off and do that and then get back to running the business. As non-execs, they came in and said, well, okay, look, if your ambition is as big as you say it is, then we're going to need to build out the org structure. We're going to need to put all of the structures and governance in place that companies have because they're successful. And we've worked on that together.
Okay. Thank you.
So Paul, that's a really good point, because it's one of the lessons I learned, and it took me a long time to learn it. Actually, was when I got my head around what the long list on the menu of what good boards do, and all the fiduciary duties. So when I got my head around all of that, when I started with younger companies who were maybe, say, only 10, 15, 20 people, I tried too early. Paul hit in the head. I tried too early. Even before got involved with Paul officially, and I realized, I did it, and I realized that they couldn't absorb it and wasn't right to absorb it at that time. And I learned the lesson the hard way by trying to impose, and I could see people glazing over, becoming almost resentful about having to do these reports. I thought, something, the report that I'm asking on behalf of the board right now is unproductive for the management team, and it was a hard lesson for me to learn. I learned that lesson, that all the reports you ask for the board really, really should be tools for the company, and realize that when you're 14, 15 people, even bigger companies than that, you can't absorb it all. So it is exactly what Paul said. It's a cultural fit, where you are with customers, where you are with the management teams, headsets, all of that. And you need to introduce it in a way that adds value to the company, not just adds value to the board, which is critical.
Thanks, Brian, for that. Maybe Kirsty, I could come on to your questions just come in there. And it says, in your experience, what other key responsibilities would you consider that a NED should have? And they've outlined a bit: strategy, development of performance, meeting goals and objectives, risk, people, diversity, big vision. And is there merit in creating a hub for business that want to learn what it might be like to have a NED on their board for an interim period before they're taking the huge leap of faith? I think it's a really good question there.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think webinars today share that experience of what it's like for a local company like Learning Pool and what they have benefited from a NED. I mean, I think it's important to say there is no legal distinction between an executive director and a non-executive director. And I always, as being the Institute of Directors, you know, you become a director and many people fall into being a director. There's no legal requirement to do any training as a director at the moment. There's 2 requirements. You're over the age of 16 and you can breathe. That's it. That's the 2 legal requirements. Now, there is significant legal responsibilities, as Brian and Paul have articulated. Now, we do cover a lot of that. I think it's really, really important that if you join any board that you understand fully your legal responsibilities. And I think a NED is looking at areas like risk, audit, communication, strategy, but it has to be right for the business. You can't have FTSE 100 corporate governance applied to a startup. So it's about on that journey of evolution, building up to and laying down that good corporate governance foundation and frameworks and controls around risk and being able to capitalize on the opportunities. And it has to be right with the individuals on the board and the DNA of the company. So as I said, I think the board, as I think was outlined there by Shirley, it covers a lot of that. It's just given that additional brain power, additional capacity, and looking at the strategy, auditing, looking at the control, communication as well too, and also looking at the various stakeholders, look at the environment, looking at stakeholder, all of those goals and kind of balancing those out.
And maybe Susan, I want you just to go back to that equity question there. You touched on it about the I suppose having that NED, the involvement of having a NED, the impact of that, and influencing funding decisions within a company. How big a part is that when people are looking from an external point of view, looking in?
As in the funders?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, the funders. I mean, how much merit do they put on that by having non-exec directors involved in the business case and the strategy, and when people are trying to access equity?
Yeah, I mean, I think regardless of whether you're accessing debt or equity, I think when you're seeking finance, it's important to have a very clear plan. And a well put together business plan. It's going to make it easier regardless of the type of finance you're looking for. I think in terms of increasing your chances of success in securing funding, that's an essential element, and it's often that you need an external party to come in and help with that, whether it's a corporate finance advisor, whether it's a NED, but a NED can certainly play that role in helping to formulate that plan. As said in the earlier part of it there, they will have been through this process before. They'll have scaled a business, they'll have brought different types of finance in, and they'll have exited businesses, so it'd be a very familiar playground to them. And I think that that's essential when it comes to securing funding, because it can be difficult raising finance, and probably more so on the equity side where it's a complete unknown for a lot. But Paul, I just want to touch on what was raised in the chat there about creating the hub to try and learn a bit more about the NED role before taking that leap of faith. And it was something that came up in webinars I'd done myself with various stakeholders a few months back, and it came through that it's not that there is this sort of general reluctance amongst business owners to take on NEDs, but it comes down to more of a lack of awareness and understanding of the role and the value of a NED, as opposed to business owners making an informed decision that it's not for them. And I think that lack of awareness is even more of a problem for the sort of smaller businesses amongst the of the SME population, and it's often those businesses that are in greatest need of NED involvement, especially during these sort of times where strategic direction is so important. And I think the more sessions like this that you can do to raise awareness of the NED role and the value of it, that's where there's real value. But it did come out in webinars that the British Business Bank held earlier in the year about the value of having that hub where people could dip in and out of almost like a pool of NEDs. without actually having officially appointed somebody onto their board. And it's something that, you know, British Business Bank don't have a magic wand and we can't just magic that up, but it's certainly a conversation I'd be happy to be part of, you know, with Kirsty, and see, is there something that can be done locally to try and create something like that? Because I definitely think it makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know there are various hubs like CEO hubs and things like that, where they're, you know, people are being brought together, different skills to offer their advice to startup businesses and incubator businesses and stuff like that. But I haven't heard of anything in that particular line. Kirsty, do you know of anything going that regionally within Northern Ireland that could be something similar like that going on, kind of informal or formal?
Well, Paul, we would have our NED hub, which would be for people who are existing NEDs or want to be NEDs. So I think it's about making the link between the businesses who are interested in and maybe pursuing NEDs with our NED pool. It is something we're looking at, particularly in the family business space, because we think NEDs can bring particularly added value in family business and trying to, you know, showcase examples. So a recent example I had was I had a family business who didn't have any outside external board members, NEDs. And one of my NEDs has particular expertise in a sector of this family business. So I approached the family business and said, look, I think this individual could bring a lot to your business. And I think it's worthwhile having a coffee, sounding each other out to see if there's an opportunity there. Now, the family business was very reluctant because, again, there was a perception there, this board member is going to come in, going to steal my business and I'm going to lose control. So they eventually, after me coaxing both parties, after a few months, decided that they're going to proceed with a 6-month strategic advisor role. And I'm delighted to say now that that individual is now a permanent member of the board as a non-executive director in that family business and has provided so much value, not only entering into the whole world corporate governance and foundation for the board, but also enter new markets, and they've actually won significant business on the back of that NED's contact. So I think Jennifer raised the question, when's the right time? I don't think there is ever a right time. It's just, you have to explore it and evaluate if it's right for you and your business, and if it's going to be that catalyst for growth. But, you know, I don't think it's on your checklist of things to do as a business to grow. I think, and you may explore it and decide it's not for you, or you may meet that individual and say, look, that's not for me. But so far, we found when we've provided that matchmaking, the value's been there, and the NED will certainly demonstrate that. And certainly in the world of VCs, you know, when, you know, a lot of the VCs will work with us as far as trying to identify NEDs, but also upskilling the executive teams that they are investing in, because at the end of the day, when you're investing in a business, you're investing in the individuals. And that's what's going to be the success for a VC. Are those individuals going to deliver the growth that the VC requires? And for them, they've done that by investing in the executive team through our courses as well too, Paul, so that they have that benchmark of what they need to be a good director.
Okay, thanks for that, Kirsty. There's a couple of questions coming in here. Pool of NEDs is interesting, but often the same names in the pool. Really entrepreneurial NEDs tend not to know about these pools. Huge difference between public sector and private sector. Maybe is that one for, would anybody like to take that one? Maybe it's Kirsty. I'm not sure now if you'd like to chip in there.
Yeah, I mean, Brian will recall this. We had a NED dinner, and we brought together our private NEDs and our public sector NEDs, and the dynamic is different because in the public sector, you know, I think many of the NEDs there, it's about that kind of public accounts committee being, and also you're there to represent, I suppose, the citizen. Whereas in the private sector, the NEDs and the executive team are working collectively together for the success of the business. So it's just a different dynamic, very, very different. And obviously, you know, on the public sector, there's a very clear pathway of how to become a NED and interview process and the STAR system and all of that. Where in the private sector, it isn't as transparent as we need it to be, but it is a difficult to know what are the opportunities for NEDs in the private sector. So, but the two are very different, you know. And
I see you signing up, smiling there, Brian. Do you want to chip in?
Yeah.
Have you something on your mind you want to share with us there?
No, Kirsty hit on the head. The meetings we've had, you know, the fundamental thing is always the same, but the emphasis on, you know, the public sector, for example, people have got big balance sheets and got maybe their utility supplying customers. So what happens is it 2/3 of the conversation at board is about fiduciary duties, it's about use of assets, it's about reputational damage. I never heard the word reputational damage with any of my private companies until I moved in to public sector ones and non-departmental. So they all do roughly, but the emphasis is way different. Kirsty had it exactly way different. So not the one's wrong. It's back to who your customer base is and who your stakeholders are, and you'll find a big difference.
Okay, another question has come.
Just on that, Paul,
Sorry,
just
Paul,
from a
yeah.
private sector, sort of
Yes.
small business perspective, like I think the point there is well made. Anyone who's running a small business is sort of naturally entrepreneurial, and therefore, they just have no shame and will talk to anybody. And that can be a great way to find somebody who could turn into a non-exec. I think the thing that I sort of look at from other companies is you have to, I think there's something that's worth doing here, which is trying to thread the needle between just finding somebody who might be good and then doing that process, because doing that proper sort of recruitment process, I see a lot of companies who have got like their chairman's their sort of father-in-law or whatever, and that just strikes me as a big mistake at some stage. Like I didn't know Brian before I started talking to him about being non-exec Donald the same, and I've worked with the guys for a long time and consider them to be good friends, but the start of the conversation, the start of our relationship was a business one, and so I think for small businesses there is a bit of a temptation to say, well, your man's made a bit of money or he's done something good, and sure, we'll put him on the board, but really,
that's not what you want.
and then you're into the whole thing that the IOD are great at helping out with, which is how do you get a non-exec back off the board, and you have a rolling cycle and all of that sort of stuff. And but to be fair, the IOD and the guys in Riddle Hall do some great stuff about managing the cadence of the board and giving advice and guidance and training around that, which is useful.
Okay, thanks, Paul, for that. There's another question came in there. I think the reluctance from some companies is also due to thinking that NEDs need salaried, which isn't the case in most. Most are non-remunerated.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. I think it's worth saying, if you're an Invest NI client company, that you can get funding for your non-executive director. So it would be encouraging anyone who is an Invest to pursue that. I think that's really, really important. The funding is there and it's quite significant. So most of the NEDs that I would be working with in the private sector would be remunerated. So, and it would be a sliding scale depending on their level of experience. But, and a lot of businesses challenge why they have to pay, but you get what you pay for, and you're paying for that experience and that wisdom and all of that. And again, you're asking somebody to take on the same legal responsibilities as an executive director, so rightfully so they should be remunerated accordingly. So
yes, thanks for that.
Well,
I would just echo that.
I'll come on to you, Susan, in a second now.
Sorry, just quickly, I would just echo that. Having I think if you find the right non-exec, you will always get more value than what you pay them for. But if there is a contract in place, then you just avoid that situation where you feel like you're imposing on them, which is no good. And then also it means that you can expect them to answer the phone, whereas if they're just doing it as a favor, I think it long term is not sustainable.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, for that. Susan, you were going to add something.
Yeah, I just wanted to, Kirsty referred there to the Invest NI support, and
yes,
it's one I wasn't even aware of myself, and I previously worked for Invest NI, so it comes back to this lack of awareness, but that scheme does exist. It not only provides financial support to it, that can be up to £15 or 49% of costs over a 2-year period. So as Kirsty said, is significant. But as part of that, they do also help you to source a NED if you like. They've got that database, and basically people who have expressed an interest in performing the NED role for SMEs, like they're not endorsed or vetted or approved by Invest, but they can sort of filter by sector and by functional knowledge to almost give you a list of potential names then that you can can work through. So it's definitely worth looking at in more detail.
Thanks, Susan, for that. I'm just looking at any questions coming up. I think we've gone through most of them. Yes, I think we've covered off most of the questions. Not unless anybody like to chip in anything there before we wrap up.
Well, just to say, I'm very
yeah,
happy
please.
if anybody wants to explore an ed for their business. I'm very happy to support any business through that and introduce them to people who've done that the same for their own company, or they want to talk to some potential NEDs. I'm very happy to do that.
Well, look, we'll put the links and contact details in with the video of this morning out to our members. And thanks, Kirsty, for that. Paul, any other final words as you're taking on the global world now and your next strategic plan that Brian is no doubt going to challenge you on? You're only looking for 3 times the growth, Brian. That's just not good enough. You have to
I know, we
push
might,
harder.
yeah. It's a target, not a limit, Paul. No, I think, hopefully it's been useful for people. I think, my experience of having non-execs in the business has been very positive. And I think the majority of companies, lots of companies do this. It does work. It's proven. And I think I would just encourage people to consider it. Don't expect appointing a non-exec to fix all your problems. It's, because nothing does, right? But as part of the journey towards either growing your business, changing your business, or doing the next big thing, having a non-exec is something I definitely recommend.
Well, look, we're getting very positive messages in from our attendees. So thank you so much for those positive comments. So look, I'm going to wrap up there. Just on behalf of the Chamber, I'd like to thank our panel members, Paul, Brian, Kirsty, and Susan, for sharing their experience and their expert advice. I hope you found the discussion beneficial. And I think the objective was to cover off, what is a non-executive director? How can they add value? How can you access one? What are the costs? And how can you engage even on a temporary basis or a full-time basis? I think we've covered off most of the objectives what we want to try and achieve this morning. So thanks so much for that. And if there are any further queries, please send them through to myself or Anna, and we'll pass them on to the panel, and we'll try and get some answers back for you. Look, for the people who joined us this morning, we really appreciate your support of the Chamber, your continued support in these difficult times. We are here for you, and just keep the chin up. We'll hopefully roll on the 13th of November. We may get some green light. We may get out there and start shopping for Christmas. Who knows? There's an American election going on as well, so who knows what's going to happen in this week. And we Brexit, they're in a tunnel, I believe. Some are trying to get some white smoke there. So a never-changing world. But thanks so much to our panels this morning, and I just wish you a safe and great afternoon.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks,
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.